The greatest thing from Quebec since Celine Dion and GSP.
A pair of siblings.
A couple of stellar young men.
Two brothers.
These two young men.
Two siblings.
The hard-hitting pair represent Canada.
Welcome to Thinkin Bros. My name is Chris.
And I'm Alex.
We're your favorite corner store philosophers trying to figure out life one conundrum at a time. Today we're going to be talking about Neil Postman's The End of Education, specifically the first two chapters entitled Some Gods That Fail, being chapter 2.
Of course, you start by the second one.
Yeah, and
the necessity.
Chapter 1, The Necessity of Gods, obviously. And for the second one, I mean, I'll let Alex give context if he thinks it's necessary. I know you guys like context usually, but I feel like here context isn't necessary. So I can just say on my side, let's just say I'm on Adolph's side.
Oh, yeah.
So...
Yeah, and most people are. So the second piece of literature we're analyzing is...
Historical... No.
Okay. I forgot. I don't have words right now.
Yeah, me neither.
What is an emotion? Which, I mean, honestly, is just a transcription of an interview. But the two sides discussing are Ralph Adolphs and Lisa Feldman Barrett.
Normal name. Both normal names.
Lisa Feldman Barrett.
Yeah.
Who are both emotion researchers. And I mean, the name of the paper is What is an Emotion? But I don't think the paper is exactly about that. It's more general questions about emotions. Just
like in which frameworks can we think about emotion in a certain way?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we see in this two different perspectives on the study of emotion. And you're like most people in being with Adolphs. Adolph's position is the common one, and I mean Barrett's. I don't know how you can even how you can even do it.
Beyond that, right? Like everyone knows I'm unbiased, so the fact that I disagree with her conception of emotion won't affect any of what I'm about to say. She seems like the most unpleasant person ever to be around, genuinely.
I mean, their disagreement sometimes felt confrontational in the middle, but at the end, she's like, I have the utmost respect for you. You didn't read the end?
Yeah, well, I read the end,
Okay.
And it feels like she only says that because the other guy said it. And what's also cool is that the other guy is confrontational, and he's obviously holding the right side also. So, Adolphs is holding the right side. So, obviously, at the end, when so basically that they had an intermediary who's a physicist, I think, and let's just say
Mlodinow.
he's a brilliant question asker, I think, genuinely. Like he's asking the right questions. He's also aware of the research in the field of emotion, which is so surprising. Like he's asking the right questions on the scientist level, like if a third person that had to have knowledge of emotion and to be unbiased would have to be in the conversation. That's what he's providing there, right?
Yeah.
It's also only 8 pages, so it's not that much that's happening. But again, it gets confrontational in the middle, and at the end, so Adolphs concludes with this paragraph when when the physicist tells him, "Okay, so you guys have any final thoughts?" And he says, well, first of all, I think you've outlined a problem with my theory.
Right.
Second of all, I respect you, and I love that we can have these conversations despite our disagreements. Then she just copies him on the compliment that he gave her, and then doesn't say that there's a huge flaw with her theory. Like, she doesn't acknowledge any part of it. She's like, there's even like a little bit of a gotcha part by the end of her paragraph where she says, and I'm glad you're like, okay, maybe I'm exaggerating in my head, but like, I'm glad you're acknowledging the weaknesses of your theory, something like that. Instead of saying, okay, mine also has problems,
I deeply admire open-mindedness and willingness to consider a range of scientific views.
Exactly.
But no, that's neutral, bro.
No. That's called meta-sociality. It's called, if you live on the level that I live on, which is called, there are the words that come out of our mouths, then there's what happens in our head, but then there's the
just the unconscious, yeah.
Meta-sociality that is about the context of a conversation, meta conversation. And I live there.
I think
and you know what she's saying.
What's also included in the context that we don't really know of is that Adolphs is like really popular. He wrote the book on emotion, and he has the popular opinion on his side. And Barrett is sort of like coming in there defending a new theory that isn't widely accepted. And so maybe we didn't see the two people interacting. Maybe in the interview, if they were filmed, if we could look at the video, the dynamic is like Adolphs is like calm and like assumes he's right, and you know what I'm saying, like just like
we're ascribing so much to this conversation that probably didn't even have. It might have been like a series of emails, you know.
That's true. And so to get into it, Adolph's theory of emotion is a functional one. And so he describes an emotion by what it does. So let's say fear can be described as the thing that makes you either freeze or run away, right? And that makes it so it can also happen in animals. You know, there's no reason for us to think that animals don't have emotions, according to him. And as for Barrett, I'm not sure about the animal part, but she ascribes emotion to an ad hoc description we create after having had the emotion. And so I think the main argument is every little instance of emotion we have is different from previous ones and will be different from future ones. So the fear I'm feeling now in this context is not going to be the same as the fear I'm feeling in the forest when a bear is chasing me. It's not exactly the same fear. And it bears a resemblance with the past fear, but it's not exactly the same fear. And so she basically argues that there's no basic thing such as fear, and it's just that we have these states, and then we ascribe fear to it because it resembles another one. And part of it is like social, the fact that other people do it, things like that.
Lisa. Well, the only question that I wanted both of them to ask was just, okay, where did the first fear come from? She's essentially saying it's a fully socially constructed concept. Essentially, because what she's saying is, oh, fear is just what you've been taught by your caregivers, that when you see a serpent, it must be scary. That's essentially what it is. And she doesn't give an account of the origin of it. And she completely disregards the evolutionary use and origin.
I mean, it can bear resemblance to another past fear, but if it's... I can understand how it's not the same fear every time. You can sort of like be fearful and excited at the same time, and that's, well, yeah, you could argue it's just the activation of both systems at the same time.
Emotions are complex. Like, yeah, that's the bottom line, I feel like.
Yeah, sure.
And she okay, so her biggest counter argument against the functional view is that we're only inferring. We don't have access to the mind. We're only inferring what the animal is feeling. We're only inferring what others are feeling. Even patterns of activation in the brain don't really mean anything because we're ascribing that to... We're just saying like, okay, well, let's define fear. Okay, that person is feeling fear. No. You're inferring that they're feeling fear, and also fear doesn't really exist because it's been taught, like something like that. And essentially, what I don't understand is that I think she's the one to quote Wittgenstein, who says that words are defined by what keeps them company or something like that. Essentially, you know, everything's a social construct. Yeah, like we woke up to that. Now we know that. That's fine. We don't need a Descartesian doubt of the disconnection between reality and what we're feeling. Like we're past that, it feels like.
My biggest concern with it is I feel like I can relate to the ad hocness of it, because at some point someone started calling it fear, and it could have been distinguished further. Like there could have been two types of fear where you're like, oh, a state of fear that's more severe or less severe. You see what I'm saying? Like those categories could have been separated a bit differently, I guess. But generally, I think it's right. And also, my biggest concern is, how are you going to make a science out of an infinite number of emotional states that you can just ad hoc create after? Like, what are you going to study? An emotion researcher with Adolph's point of view can say, okay, I'm going to study fear. Let's see how fear manifests. But with Barrett's, I'm not sure what you're gonna study at all. Like every individual instance of every emotion, like you can hunker down on one emotion state that one person had one time and study that to the end. I don't know.
Exactly. Sure. I mean, I'm sure she has a method in place that kind of circumvents that, and it's probably useless to the rest of the literature. But if everything she's saying is right, let's still go back and analyze what happened with time, right? Like what happened through evolutionary biology, which as a scientist, they probably both agree on, right? We developed before even being able to talk, aka when we were animals, more or less. Well, we are animals, whatever. Physiological and conscious reactions to our environment. They are adaptive and serve a specific purpose. Everything, there's the example of the fruit fly that is scared of a predator and for some reason doesn't fly away, walks away, just to keep the parallel between it and the human. I just imagined it with two big paws. I don't know, whatever. And okay. And so every reaction to something that might be threatening, we now call fear. But that's also not the case, right? We also have like anxiety, as long as it's anticipatory, and fear when we're already in the situation. Like the categories exist and they're already good. Like no one, well, I'm sure some nitty-gritty scientists disagree on them, but whatever. It's really whatever. Because socially, as we use them in 90% of cases, normally, we all agree on them and we have absolutely no problem. And it's like, well, is this happiness or joy? Is it persisting or acute? Whatever. Like, you guys deal with that? Scientists deal with that? Let's just study the normal
I feel happy,
stuff.
I feel good, and that's all I need.
Yeah, so my problem is, okay, we evolve these. Animals obviously have them because we evolved from animals and our physiological responses are the same as. But when I'm pretty sure she kind of a little bit dodges the question when she's asked, do you think animals can feel emotions? And she says, well, obviously she says, well, we can infer they feel emotions maybe. And would you call it emotions? I mean, you call it something, whatever. And so we evolve these emotions, right? That are, oh, and also let's not confuse emotion and affect. That's fine though. Like, I'm sure on a scientific level, it's the distinction is important. And we became more and more conscious of them. And obviously we have this metacognition that we developed as humans that is more, more sophisticated. And now we can analyze it and also acknowledge emotions, ignore them, choose to act on them, be affected by them, whatever. That's all a result of the development of consciousness. And then when we developed language, we classified what already existed into useful categories that match our intuitions. Like, this is it's like the time we talked about beliefs in philosophy, right? It's if you had never started the conversation, there wouldn't be any problem whatsoever, like, to begin with, right? Like, what's a belief? Something that you hold to be kind of true, but you haven't maybe whatever, right? Let's read a 20-page paper and create a problem. Let's do it. So now emotion is like, okay, my heart starts beating fast when I see a lion. Okay, I developed the language to think about that. I developed the consciousness and I don't know what you would call it, like the agency to ignore it also, right? Because animals would,
control.
Exactly, because animals would, I guess the theory is act on their emotions anyway. Like, okay, the dog sees something during mating season, really something, anything. It goes toward it, just to say the least. And so, contrarily to me, for example, so they have existed. We've developed a sophisticated way of perceiving them, and now suddenly we're doubting that they were evolutionarily created. I mean, you seem to be playing devil's advocate here. Do you want to kind of reconcile that with that? Because it seems as though, from what she's saying and from the way she speaks of its origin, it's almost as though we like the emotions everyone has now come essentially from socializing and being taught what they are, and then just associating them with past instances of what we were taught. Like, I don't get it.
Well, my thing is just, I think why I'm playing devil's advocate is that I understand where she's coming from, and
She wants to be different.
yeah, like you. And I see how she's sort of like technically right. Every instance of emotion is not the same, right? Technically, that's true. The context modifies exactly the experience you have. Not exactly the same neurons fire every time. Whatever. Technically, it's true, and I guess you could say that simply out of resemblance, even if it's a 97% resemblance between the past fear and the present fear, that's why we associate it, even though it's not the same. Like, technically, she's right, but I just really don't see the use for it. I really don't see why you would say that, why you would describe it like that.
Exactly, because ultimately, if you take the functionalist view, like, I forgot what we learned in our class was the problem with the functionalist view. I guess, is it the interspecies?
We didn't look at it through the same thing. Why were we talking about functionalism?
I think it's about mental states. It was. Well, is the octopus example for that or not?
Oh,
I think maybe. Okay, so essentially, one of the problems with the functionalist view, as I remember it, maybe correct me, is that, for example, if all you're saying is that a mental state is defined by the input and the output, which is essentially right, the output being the behavioral output.
Right.
That's kind of the function. So if a human, for example, a human's heart starts beating fast and they get the freeze frame, please let me paint a mental portrait
reaction
that we all know to be true. The freeze and run. What is it? Fight or flight.
Yeah.
In front of a predator, and then if an octopus gets the same thing and acts the same way, and the heart and all three hearts start beating faster, and then it swims away, I think what you would essentially be saying and would be problematic is that they're having the same thing, or is that not a problem? To me, it doesn't seem like a problem. In any case, I forgot the problem with the functionalist view. It's obviously more right than whatever Barrett's got, but that's the thing, right? That's what categories are. Like, oh, this apple has a yellow spot and also a red spot. Would you dare call it an apple if it's so different? Yeah, it serves the same function of appleness in my mouth, right? Like, and this is the thing, right? Philosophy is pretty good at identifying instances of, and maybe that's what it would take, right? A thought experiment where at first I might think it's one emotion, but in analyzing it, it might be another. Like, philosophers are good at this, right? They're saying, okay, here is what we believe truth to be, right? Knowledge, true knowledge, whatever. But here's an example of an instance where you might at first believe it is, but then when you look deep into it, it's not really true belief or true justified belief knowledge. Okay, we spotted a mistake. Let's analyze it. I've never run into a real problem with an intuition being later disproven about emotion, except maybe what you said at the beginning, where it might be a more complex state of combined emotions. That's the thing. That's the ultimate problem, it seems, right? You can feel ambivalent, and you can feel happy and sad, right? Like, let's say a relative had a really good life, but they're dead. You're at their funeral, you remember all the beautiful things, blah, blah. Like, the problem was with emotions come up when they're combined, and that's it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's not like, oh, I feel this type of fear, this type of fear. It's whatever. I mean, you get it.
Yeah. I think what you would find interesting also is, I mean, Adolphs has to study this, like, as his career. And so one thing you have to do if you're studying emotion is separate emotion from feelings. So feelings is the subjective, I guess, report that humans can have. And since the argument is that animals also can have these states, feelings are out of the question, and all you're analyzing are the central emotion states. That's how he defines an emotion. A central emotion state is some state of the brain or of the central processing unit of whatever animal it is, that is corresponding to a fear. And actually, surprisingly, we hear a lot about like the amygdala is fear, this is this. We actually don't know the central emotion state for any emotion at all. Like it's sort of distributed throughout the brain. We can't have that high definition analysis of it. Also, it's hard to temporally, some things happen before and some things happen after. So like an acute reaction of fear.
That's the entirety of time. You just described time.
Temporally.
Temporally. If and only if. Okay.
But you know, like you freeze, so there's a physical reaction first, and then some physiological reactions come a bit later. Like you start. I'm sure a
million other things happen in the brain for sure. Yeah.
So it's hard, but you don't need to say it's ad hoc.
Yeah, and the problem. By the way, explain what ad hoc is. But the problem also is that localizationalist theories aren't good. Like they're just not good. Yeah. The brain we know this from, for example, if people lose a part of the brain that we initially thought was for purpose A, they just gain back the function somehow. So the brain is really a complex mechanism that, like, if it loses one gear, 3 gears are going to shift and, yeah.
Yeah, I would have two things to say about that. Well, first of all, there are some parts of the brain, like for aphasias, like Broca's area and Wernicke's area, that if you lose that ability and you lose it for good. But it does seem like those are exceptions, and especially for complex mechanisms like emotions and thoughts and some of these actions, it's inevitably the whole brain. But our technology is really not that good to like have a high definition image of all the neurons and well defined in terms of time. So we sort of have to do that. Ad hoc, for those that were wondering, means that it's not a real thing that I have before I have the emotion and I say, okay, this is fear, and then I have the emotion and you're like, oh yeah, that was fear. You create it after the instance. After each and every instance, you create a category to describe what just happened. I guess that's a good description.
Yeah, and that should also signal you that that's not what emotion is, but whatever. And yeah, I think also one of my problems with that is, I guess for me it would be my final thought, is the intercultural consistency. How do you account for universal emotions?
Right.
If we were all kind of like socialized into them, I just simply don't get it.
Right, it does seem like there's a lot of homogeneity.
Yeah, or you look 2,000 years ago, Plato is still using words like happy and sad. Like, how can it be so temporally consistent if it's not evolutionary? Whatever. And yeah, obviously the Wittgensteinian view is fine in the sense that, yes, it exists. Yes, there's not 100% direct correlation between it and reality, but just as is mentioned in the paper, so is our view of the stars. Like, if you take that as the gold standard of
Gold's Gym
of sciencing or objectivity, through Descartesian doubt, we can also figure out that there's not 100% correlation between our perception of it and reality, and that's just something you have to accept. And the only question is emotion like that to exactly the same extent? Well, no, it's probably even more subjective, just because the brain is complex and social things are more complex than stars. Like my therapist is telling me, I got to talk to more people, and it's not like easy. It's a long-term task. So, yeah, I get uncomfortable when I talk about this. So, all right. Well, do we move on?
Yeah, sure.
It's fine, dude. It's fine. Whatever. Like, we read that. That's cool. It confirms, as so many things do more than I advance in life, it just confirms my strong stance on something. Like, Is it? I think that's a psychological phenomenon, right? For all you psychology fans, when you hear a weak counter argument to your point of view gets stronger, right? More radical. That's a thing in social psychology, I think.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So well, there you go. I'm
Yeah,
more
but-
radical. I'm on Adolph's side. Let that be known.
The thing is, I think we pretty much agree on the whole. We pretty much agree on everything we just talked about, right? It's just in the way you present your argument versus the way I talk about it, right? Like when I said
I think so. Yeah.
yeah, when I said technically she's right, you agree with me.
Yeah,
Technically,
like
it's
every time she said it, it feels like she was like raising her finger and saying, "Well, actually," and I was like, "Yeah, dude, yeah. If you look in an encyclopedia, objectivity means what you're saying, but also there's human life and normality.
okay. So the end of education.
So maybe it's fresher in your mind than it is in mine." That rhymed.
So excited.
Okay.
Too excited.
Okay. You can maybe try to summarize, and I'll try to cling on to your points.
Okay. So Postman talks about education, obviously, in his book, The End of Education. But I think the most important thing to establish from the start is he talks a lot about gods. The first 2 chapters are named The Necessity of Gods and Some Gods That Fail.
Respectively. And also, he just says this. So he wants to solve the education crisis, and there are 2 problems to solve. The mechanical one and the metaphysical one.
Engineering one and the metaphysical.
Yeah, engineering one. And so the engineering one is, how are we going to place the tables in the classroom, and where are they going to study?
How
And
many
the
pages per week? How many?
Yeah,
Whatever.
and the metaphysical one, well, which is actually what people concentrate on usually.
Mhm.
But the metaphysical one is the real problem.
Why do we teach?
Yeah. And
Well-
essentially he discusses it in the first 2 chapters, respectively.
And so the important thing to establish is that he equates God with narrative, with sort of meaning. Most importantly, narrative. So what's the story? What's the story that guides your education? In the first chapter, he discusses, well, the necessity of gods and how we need a story, we need a reason to live, but also for education, to teach kids. And so he argues, he says a lot, assuming we know about stuff. Did you get that feel? Like he doesn't go into explaining or quoting. He just assumes that we know this and
Yeah,
agree with
we're
him.
in with the culture, but he's also super knowledgeable. He's quoting left and right.
Yes. And so he says that when education and a lot of schools were with religion and God with a big G, because that's another distinction, the narrative he's talking about are little gods that guide for some time, not God, the God of religion. But when schools were like Christian, let's say, they didn't have the metaphysical problem. Those problems were solved. They knew what they were doing. The job of the schools were to educate people to be pious and to be good Christians, and that's what they did. And then you could resolve the engineering issues, and you had no larger problems. But obviously, this is going away. People are less and less religious. And so, I mean, I guess anything else to say about chapter 1?
Not that I remember, no.
Some Gods That Fail, chapter 2, I think sort of discusses this with the rise of science, which is another god of sorts, another narrative that, if the god before the narrative was, I want to be pious, I want to get to heaven, I want to be a virtuous person. Now with science, the narrative is sort of, I want to know the world in a detailed way and find out what it's all about. And
Prayer becomes proof, as he says.
prayer becomes proof.
He didn't say that. I just made it up. I'm sorry.
Okay. And is that the current God that's active right now?
Well, no, right? Because what he says later on, and it feels prophetic, it's that the god of consumership
Right.
is the one that's kind of has taken over. I don't think he necessarily says it's taken over. Maybe he does mention it at some point, but it didn't stick with me that he's giving one god more power than the other. What he is saying is that the god with the big G has unfortunately been defeated. He says, at least it's what Nietzsche said before he went crazy, right? Something like that. By the way, I didn't know that the last 11 years of Nietzsche's life, he just kind of collapsed and just never was coherent anymore. It brings so much more coolness to him.
Yeah, but that sentence stuck with me too, because the last thing he said before he went crazy, sort of exemplifying what happens when there is no God. You know, if he was the most acutely aware of the fact that God is dead, then it makes sense that he would go crazy and not have a narrative to guide his life and just not know what to do.
Or he's not dead, and it was his punishment for saying that. Okay, so essentially there are three new gods that arise. Science, which has defeated kind of the god with a big G in a way, because I guess
because it has a better explanation of the physical world.
Yeah, it just fits our intuition.
He gets into like religion, let's say Judeo-Christian religions, or
by the way,
even.
He seems very religious. Like he's a American purebred god.
He's old also.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the story of God with a big G, he acknowledges that it has a less vivid and, accurate explanation of the physical world, I don't know, of the history of the earth, but it has a narrative story that guides us in our life, even though it's not objectively true as science is.
Yeah, then the other two gods are consumership and economical
utility,
which, I mean, I would conflate the two, but
consumership and economical.
It seems that one is serving the other in a way, but
yeah, one leads to the other.
Doesn't really matter. What he's arguing for is that both are futile and ultimately won't bring us pleasure, but it is the narrative that we've told ourselves. And we know this from psychology. Maybe you remember the name of the guy who was essentially at the forefront of making America a consumership society. And he says that we must shift America from a needs society to a want society. Remember that?
Yeah. I don't know who it was though, yeah.
So what's interesting in that for me is that it's all by design. Like it's not accidental, right? Okay, what was accidental in a way is that when humans didn't have science, they had to explain absolutely everything in a way with the information that they had at that point, right?
Yeah.
Okay, they turned to the God with a big G, and that's cool. More and more physical effects have physical causes, and we discover them. So more and more science takes over. There's a certain tipping point where if you had to choose, one of them just provides more answers in concrete ways and not like just blind faith kind of way.
Yeah.
And there's a safety in that. There's a safety in the other one as well, but there's a safety in that. And so that happens. But based on this new God, that kind of did arise inevitably but accidentally in a way, if you know what I'm saying. The other one was designed, right? Because, okay, once we're past this, we've talked about this in the past, that for whom is the hedonistic idea of heaven, right? Any conception that you want when you're describing heaven. Only good things, only good interactions, no human hardship, no whatever. For whom is that heaven? And the answer is medieval peasants, right? Like, okay, who wants to lay on the couch with a button to spike their dopamine, right? Which we have now.
Because they actually didn't have that.
Yeah, exactly. So, obviously, you're working 16 hours in the field all day. What's the most desirable state? Well, where we are now. Get to where we are now. What's the most desirable state? Having the motivation to work 16 hours a day. Something like that, right? So, obviously, like, that's just...
Yeah, and as Phil said, that's the way to reconcile it. Heaven is whatever the best state for you is.
whatever isn't those two things in a way. Like if you dig deep enough, it mustn't be those two things.
Right.
Because you might think you want one, but it's not going to be that.
You're gonna want the other one when you want
when you're there. So yeah, that's a little bit of the humor of the human condition. Let me not get too Camusian on you guys. So now that we have this society with answers and with resources and who's pretty much well off if you compare it to anything 1,000 years ago, where do we go from here? How do we keep them at bay if it's not
Who's they?
society?
Okay.
How do we keep them at bay?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, how do you keep these people at bay? Because when you have a god, you have a moral code.
Yeah.
When you have science, the more it takes over, the more you're like, well, what is morality really? Like, can we doubt this? And
Okay,
so,
but at bay from what? That's just, I don't know.
like, calm, like from breaking a moral code, because they're like, if you think it in fully scientific terms, death is just part of the life cycle. So why not just go around killing everyone?
Isn't that your point of view?
Okay. Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
Right, but then there's
How do we keep
philosophy,
you
but then
at bay?
that's
Yeah.
next level, but whatever. So how do you keep people at bay? Consumership.
Right.
Right, like if you stay in your pod and go to work like a beautiful little ant and invest, you're going to get the car that you want in 5 years. So just keep it, keep it cool.
And you want that car. You desperately want that car.
Yeah. And
We also need to
marketing-
convince people of that.
Yeah, well, yeah. And it's pretty successful.
Yeah.
So I don't remember the exact objection Neil gives for consumership and economic utility. Obviously, I think I didn't pay attention to them because to me it was self-evident that those gods are going to fail.
Well, the god of economic utility, the objection is it can't guide education. So the argument is, okay, you're going to go to school, and after school you're going to get a solid, good job, and you're going to make money and you're going to contribute to society. But he argues that there's actually no correlation between economic growth and education level. I think he says that in some period of highest economic growth, there was actually the lowest education or something like that.
And also America being a superpower, economical superpower, it's never had really the greatest education either. So
Right.
the correlation doesn't flow in either way. So yeah, education.
Right.
Yeah.
And
So it's a statistical counter-argument, which is even more interesting than all the rest that I have to say philosophically about it.
yeah,
That's interesting, yeah.
I had another thing. Oh yeah, and he says the jobs in the future that are going to be the most needed are jobs that aren't necessarily associated with education, with college education, let's say. Waiters, other jobs.
True. Like 80% of the new jobs that are created aren't even the ones that... Well, I just said 80 for some reason. It doesn't matter. But yeah, that's very interesting. So then maybe the consumership argument would be more philosophical. But in any case, we agree it's not the way to go. Now, I thought about the following. Maybe, later in the book, he's obviously going to give a replacement, maybe a new god to follow. But I think what has come out of a lot of conversations and my intuitions is that the way to fix a lot of problems in adulthood is purpose. Is definitely purpose, right? We've said this a lot. Like, our if we could defeat our scientific minds that need proof and just turn to God, a lot of stuff would be fixed, right? I'm so tired, I can't get up in the morning. Okay, but does the prospect of heaven sound interesting to you? Yes.
God is watching.
God is watching, therefore you must get up and do the thing. Oh, okay. Well, that's logical. You see, it gets even logical at that point, so whatever. You can't, fail. You can't fail. So...
He was going to offer new gods at the end, the solution to every problem.
So for adults, that seems like the perfect fix. But I thought about this, right? We've both worked with kids. What keeps a kid at bay? Is it a god? Is it a purpose? Is there something deeper that you can attach him to that will actually always be a guide? And if so, can't that only be a parental figure? Like the fear of disappointing a parental figure, like a good quality parental figure? And if that is the case, if you look at the statistics of secure attachment, it's not looking great. Like it's not horrible, but it's not looking great in terms of what percentage of people actually deliver on that, right? So do you understand what I'm saying? Like, is there a deeper purpose that you can give a kid? Is that what their actions are based upon? No, right?
Just their parents?
That's kind of my solution that I just came up with. I came up with a question to ask you. What's the deeper thing that, the underlying foundation of kids' actions?
Well, I think the thing is, we don't see kids like this, but kids in religious families certainly get religious early and don't want to disappoint God early. So I think
right,
that's
but
applicable to kids.
Is that not related to the parental side? Is it not they don't want to disappoint God through their
God
parents
is the father.
through God? God is the father. But if you just look at every other situation, right? If you want to universalize it, even people who don't have God in their life, wouldn't it be, I don't want to disappoint God because my parents care about God, and I don't want to disappoint my parents. And on the other side, on the scientific side, little scientist priests, they're like, my mom does chemistry. I must not disappoint her.
I must be a good scientist because my mom is.
No, not like that. But like, if you wanted to universalize it, I understand, right? Like, if you see the kid who's going to church every Sunday and, really aspirational about being in the church choir or holding a candle for the old guy, like something like that is actually important to them. But so is baseball to the non-religious person, right? So is performing in baseball and seeing their parents proud, right? So, and we know this through Piaget's cognitive evolution theory of, well, not cognitive evolution theory, but cognitive development theory of children. There are big qualitative shifts between phases. So, sure, at 16 years old, you might, feel this either apathy or disturbance in your purpose, and take on this absurdism view or nihilism view. And the remedy to that would certainly be, I can say with certainty, it would be something like purpose, philosophy, religion, whatever. Is that the case for kids?
Here's the thing. I would argue that throughout your life, it's always sort of about other people. It just shifts. Like, when you're young, it's about your parents. As you grow up, it gets more and more about your peers, right? You want to impress people by being good at sports, by doing this. You don't want to be a loser. In adolescence, that becomes even more obvious. And then in adulthood, you have to find a spouse, get married, you want to do things for your kids. It's always about people. Or if, like for you, it's about society, whatever. It's always about other people. And
that's
are you on the lookout for a new God? Is that what you're saying? Like, what is the God that guides us?
No, it's just, I know that what he's probably about to offer. Well, first of all, if he's about to offer a reversal to the old God, I think that's going to work for adults. If he's about to offer a new God, I'm very interested.
A reversal to the old God?
Well, a return to religion.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And so, but my biggest concern with what you said, the fact that it's all about other people, is that if you see the people who are at the peak of purpose, so people who actually, for whom, Aristotelian virtue is important for, or people who are completely religious, okay, they're gonna follow through on their guidelines even when no one's watching. God is always watching, right? So even when it's hidden, there are no cameras, the store clerk has walked away, they're gonna look at that packet of Cool Ranch chips that is so desirable, and they're not going to steal it. Obviously, a very relatable scenario. I'm a pretty relatable guy. So they're going to, in their head is going to be like, no, I must be virtuous. And in the most profound way, it's going to make them feel right because they took the right decision. No one was watching. Sure. In the religion side, God is watching. In the virtue side, being the best version of yourself is itself the reward. So in both
Yeah.
cases, they're going to do things at some point for themselves only. So if I were to say this, sure, yes, we are social creatures, it's inevitable, but on the deepest sense, it feels like it's for us. So that's why I think there's such a big shift where kids, if kids, I don't know, everyone's walked away, somebody forgot their lunchbox, and later on they have a snack to take after lunch, and then they see the mini Oreos in someone's lunch bag, and they're the last in the lunchroom. They could steal it. I don't think they're gonna have the thought of, if they knew they couldn't get caught, right? Like everyone's in class. I don't think they're gonna have the thought of, I must do this because it's the right thing to do. They might revert to the, I don't want to disappoint my parents, I'm gonna get in trouble for this. Some things like that are outwardly. But if you give them a confirmation that no one's ever gonna find out, they're just gonna be like, I want my Oreos, man. But on an adult side, that's not gonna be the case, right?
I'm still thinking rare Freud metaphor. I still think it's like the super ego subconscious part that's so deeply ingrained within you that when you're a kid, you don't have that super ego that's that strong. So you don't have it in your subconscious. It's a lot of it is, my parents are here, I need to act right when they are here. But as you grow up, expectations from your parents, from your friends, from society and everything become so internalized that on the surface level, it's, I want to be virtuous, I need to do this because it's a good thing to do. But if you go one level higher, what's motivating that is, let's say, what I was thinking is, I need to maintain this habit of virtue because if I act like this now, I'm going to act like this in other situations and
They're
will
gonna
hurt
find
people,
out ultimately.
right? Something like that.
That's a good theory. I think that discussion, it seems beyond the scope, but it doesn't really, because ultimately what we're trying to determine
I
is,
love beyond the scope. Dude. You're just like beyond the scope and you don't talk about something.
oh, that
It's
wasn't,
not an attack at you. It's just like so many papers are just like, it's beyond the scope of this
it's
paper.
true. It is
And
an
a lot-
easy tool to use,
It is true.
and a lot of it is beyond the scope.
Yeah,
But it's not really, in the sense that, yes, we are trying to find out the most fundamental motivation of humans. And philosophy hasn't done this in a couple thousand years. If we had 1 or 2 more hours of podcast, we'd probably get to the bottom of it. But I think even if we're not to have that debate, for me, the real question here, and I think I know your answer, but the real question is, whatever it is for us, adults, is it the same? Can't we say it's the same for children? And I think we both agree that it's not, because I'm saying it's not because for them pleasing themselves, well, in the virtue sense, or God is always watching, doesn't really exist. And what you're saying is that the outwardly
manifestation
desire
of,
to be the most virtuous self and like appear as such hasn't been internalized yet. So we're both saying that there's more than, I must follow God's footsteps and therefore I will go to class even if it's boring and I want to play on my iPad, right? There needs to be something more.
So you're arguing that there needs to be something more.
I think kids need a different God than adults do. That's what I'm saying. And I think that God, and I just came up with that theory like 15 minutes ago, it's a good parent, like a good parent figure that they actually want to please.
And that's how, what he was referring to earlier is that about, 60% of parenting is secure?
I think it is, yeah. So it's not that bleak.
Yeah, but still 40% of people have insecure attachments to their parents, and it is a good predictor of a lot of psychopathology. So it makes sense that, not having this narrative, not having this, at least initial step, right? You have to evolve from I can't disappoint my parents, and people that don't. For people that don't, that's problematic.
Yeah.
But maybe you're right. Yeah, I think it makes sense that be our first God.
Yeah, and it feels like it could be a direction that Neil takes because he's the religious of the religious mind, and therefore maybe conservative, and therefore maybe family values. Because this is something, somebody that a figure on the internet says 20 years ago there wouldn't be school shootings just because you can't put that on your family name. Right? Like that's the thing. The ultimate thing.
In honor cultures.
Yeah, people don't care anymore for that, right? Their parents can't say, you are a X family name, you will not do this. Like this is
that
going
sounds
to be
ridiculous now. We see it in movies, and it's
exactly
for us.
You don't mess with the changretas, like stuff like that.
Yeah.
That has value and it holds a lot of power, and it has lost its power, and it was intertwined with the religious side, but family values can come back without the religion coming back to it, right? Like
Yeah.
your family name mattering, your reputation. But I'm saying that in an idealistic sense. But if you think about every culture that does, right, like even think about Latino cultures that just, they go to church, they believe in God, they have the sense of community, the family matters. Are Italians religious?
I mean, different people are religious.
You know what? That might be more of a mafia thing where it could be disconnected from religion, right? Like, oh, this is my name, I shall defend it. There doesn't need to be any Christ involved in it.
What do you think? Where do you think he's going? Who's a new god? What's the proposal? You think
is that what you think is going to happen? By the way, like, that's my theory, but it might not even be that. Like, is he going to give us a new god that these children must follow?
I don't know if he can. I feel like this sort of god, this sort of direction that people get, sort of just happens, and it's very hard to predict. Right? You see what I'm saying? It will just happen. Like,
yeah, sure.
Right now, it may be ideologies that go this way or that way. He talks about in the 20th century the god of communism, fascism, and Nazism.
Right. Should we keep reading it and like just do a follow up on next week?
I think we should. We can do 2 chapters at a time if it feels appropriate, and
yeah,
just
I want to do more if we can.
Progress through them.
Yeah, just because it feels like a lot of what we've been saying is based on an idea he brought up, but not much of what he's writing. Because again, we didn't even think about the intermediary gods of Nazism, fascism, and communism.
Right. We didn't get into a lot of the nitty gritty that he talks about. I guess because it's an overview, the first 2 chapters of what's about to come, and a lot of explanation, and so we just talked about what the gist we got.
Yeah, but it's also interesting that it is narratives that rule the world, and for a couple thousand years, it was the narratives of the Christian religion, and narratives involve a lot of things. It involves, who am I following? It involves, okay, what am I gonna be doing that confirms my faith in it, right? Like the religious practices. He mentions that adherence to narrative takes some specific actions, right? At some point, it just didn't stick with me. Okay, here's a funny quote. If we knew, for example, that our students wished to be corporate executives, would we train them to be good readers of memos, quarterly reports, and stock quotations, and not bother their heads with poetry, science, and history? I think not. Everyone who thinks not. So, essentially, a big argument about education that he has is that it must be generalized at the beginning and for the longest time. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, by the end of high school, I had this strong impression that, look, I already know the direction I'm going to take, right? Like, I got this math thing on lock. Can we please just eliminate history and art from my curriculum and let me be who I am?
Yeah, well, you didn't go into math.
Right, but it's still, I guess I did take a scientific side, a pseudo scientific side of psychology, and art and history certainly didn't help me with it. So what do you think about his argument that education should be as general and as inclusive of, what's the social sciences and other sciences, actual science.
I don't know how much emphasis he really actually puts into that. It's not like an argument he makes for a chapter, but
Well, he did spend a few pages saying like, okay, if we know our kids aren't going to be that, we're not going to train them to be astronauts from when they're 13, right?
well, for me, the necessity of general education, and here we can talk about the engineering part of it. When does it end? To what level do we need to teach general knowledge? It's necessary to get a general education because a kid doesn't know what he's going to do later. And as he develops, as he sees different fields, it allows him to explore different things and choose where to specify, but he needs the exposure to all of these things.
Yeah. So have you ever heard about the view that things that we might not remember that happen in our life may affect us,
Yeah, okay.
like the unconscious and stuff? I just wanted to phrase it in the most ridiculous way of the Freudian concept, where it's obviously obvious.
Obviously obvious.
So this is, I think I might have mentioned it in the blog that no one reads, except a select few people that I really like. So that you might be saying, oh, when am I going to use the quadratic formula in my day? You know, the meme that went around a few years ago. Hey, it's been 7 years since high school and I still haven't used the quadratic formula. But mathematical thinking and the things that it makes you do are useful on a subconscious level. And especially, people who can't, I don't know, multiply their taxes and know exactly how much they're going to pay before going to the cashier.
I think most people, though.
Yeah, it is most people, unfortunately. Despite some people by the end of high school being like, oh, I mean, this math is way too advanced for, like, I already know what I'm going to be doing in my life, right? And to a certain extent, I got to look at myself and be like, okay, well, is that the case for the history and art that I wanted to stop way before it stopped?
Right.
For me? And, well, obviously my answer is no, because we were 17 and we had to draw stuff. Like, that's not useful in any subconscious or Freudian way. Okay? And I was rated on that, and it actually affected my grades. Like, just no. History, obviously another discussion. Well, the way it's tested by circling answers or writing in dates in holes in text.
Right.
Yeah, it's not going to be subconsciously affecting me. Math, with giving me new problems to solve that I must adapt to and adapt my mathematical thinking, sure. Maybe including a logic class. That would help a lot of people. That would maybe fix a few problems in society. But another thing that I thought about is how even after that, by 19, we still had phys ed classes, right? And I was like, well, I mean, by this point, surely it would be in my hands, right? Surely you could just kind of transfer that task to me. I'm not going to be evaluated on something like that. But all of those classes were centered on performance and information. Like, my professor was teaching me to breathe through my stomach and not through my well, not lungs, but
Thoracic
chest,
cage.
right? Yeah, but like not inflating my chest, but instead inflating my stomach. And we had we had relaxation periods. And when I was 18, I was like, well, what am I doing here? But then when it stopped, I also had a few years of not going to the gym, and I genuinely felt how bad that feels. So because that's something that you're always going to have in life, it feels as though that might be useful to be part of your education until late. And I'm sure when you're 15, it just feels like, oh, there is literally a class where I'm going to be playing soccer, which I like, with my friends, which I like. And the combination of the two is great. And you maybe neglect the health purpose of it, obviously, right? Because you're young, that's not your concern. By 18, you might be saying, okay, well, why are we still doing this? I'm in college and here in Canada, I'm in college, I don't even know these people, and now I have to embarrass myself at sports with them. What's going on? But then you look back and it's actually useful. It's not for art and history. So all I'm saying, right, it doesn't matter, we don't have to have the debate here, is that it's, for some disciplines, it might be useful to include them until late in your general education because they're going to be things that affect your life. And other things, no.
Yeah. I guess I agree, and we can argue about the specific level it should go up to, because the obvious argument for art and history is if someone wants to become an artist and actually put things down on an art board, you have to expose them to that passion and give them the chance. But when you're 16, 17, it's like you're not going to become an artist. Probably.
Yeah, and it also has the same problems as with math, right? Like some people are on level 100 and some people are level 30, and if you make them both do the same thing, the person on the level 100 is going to make it, well, you know, you make them do a thing of the level 50, the person of the level 100 is going to be bored and do something amazing, and the person of level 30 is going to be like, why am I drawing? I'm 16 years old and I'm good at math. Like, can I just do things in life?
That's another reason education sort of feels wrong, is because it's I think it's not well adapted. I think for some people they need so much more. They could do so much more.
Yeah.
And when you have one set level, I guess it's good for some people who, for how much of the population do you think that the level of school is good and makes, you know, challenges them enough and makes them progress well enough? Because there are people under that who find school way too hard.
It's a normal curve, I think. It's a normal curve. It has to be like 60%. 20% are struggling because it's way too easy, and 20% are struggling because it's way too hard.
How do you solve that? Would you have like a categorical cutoff where if you're performing this well at school, you have, well, there are those things, right? In Canada, we didn't get exposed to them much, but like advanced placement classes in the US.
Yeah, I've thought about this, like the mechanical problem again. I would maybe do something like, okay, the bottom 20%, you give them an additional hour that they have to stay after school, just because you're not going to make it in life if you're bad at high school, okay? And
in high school, it would seem like so much, but realistically, it just builds good habits. Like, you're going to need to be that guy that works harder.
Yeah, if you're genuinely just less good at life, you're going to need to put in more time to get the same results as others. And it's okay if you don't finish at 3:30, but instead of 4:30, and you can just go play with your friends afterwards. So I would make it a mandatory thing if they're behind. And for the people at the top, I would push them more, because I know it was a possibility. But again, I would push them more and scout them to just be placed in the next year above.
Right.
Like, I think you and I could have made that if someone just reached out. Like, I probably could have been a year ahead in high school if someone just told me the mechanics of what it...
Like, exactly the paperwork to fill out.
Yeah, like, okay, what do I have to do? Pass the final exams? Okay, give me the material. Because in high school, we didn't really even have the textbooks. We were given, like, papers gradually to learn stuff, and we were taught stuff in class. If I were given the textbook and I were told, look, you can be a year above if in a month you pass the final exam of your year.
Well, in math, chemistry,
like, okay,
stuff like that, we did have textbooks.
Yeah, we did have textbooks. That's true.
But I think the bigger problem wasn't, like, we could have done that if we weren't lazy, but we were also lazy. I think that
we were.
I think the education system in some way sort of supports that for some reason. I don't know. Like,
it's because we were in the top 20%. We had to perform things at half our level. That's how you instill laziness, right? If we had to catch up to people who are a year above to us, we would probably be in the middle of the distribution. Probably not. We would probably still be in the top 20%. Doesn't matter. But, you know, it's how it works.
Yeah. So the problem is, you know, let's say we were good enough to be in the grade higher. They have no real proof of that because we didn't get 100 on all our exams. We got at least 90 on all our exams, which isn't
and
that,
partly
like, amazing.
Because we didn't care.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how do you detect that exactly? It's hard to say. You need like a teacher to spot you and say, oh, yo, this guy's like, he's lazy, but he got potential.
Yeah, and I think teachers who are good and have experience can spot those students, and I'm sure it's quite easy, right? If just the way in which you converse with a teacher, or if you're always the one Like they're introducing new materials, right? And you're always the one spotting their mistakes on the board, which, we've probably both done that. You just spot an inconsistency. Sure, it's new material to you, but you're following the train of thought and you're spotting a new consistency.
It's crazy how naturally bad some teachers are at teaching. And they just went into this career for some reason, and then they're there teaching people.
Yeah, I mean, when into the career, it's not even the wild part for me. For me, it's the people who scout others to be a teacher. Like, that's someone's job, not to be a teacher. Like, that's fine. You can just be bad at conveying material, but actually be really good at that material. Like, it's not wild to assume that you would think you're good at teaching if you're good at the material, right? Like, I'm good at math, therefore I will be a good
but what I had in mind
teacher.
was we're like elementary school teacher. Everyone's good at elementary school material.
Right. That is sad. But the people whose job it is to accept those people as teachers, and for some students, well, not even some students, right? For some teachers, every single student in the class can point to them and say, hey, like, I don't know much. This is all new material for me, but that is a bad teacher. Right? The fact that is accepted is
but you're saying like the people that choose these teachers. The thing is, the process is there's not enough teachers. If you meet these criteria, come teach.
That is very sad, and that's maybe part of the mechanical problem. So, okay, we know what we're reading next. We're gonna follow up on this. Neil's gonna give us a new god, and we're also gonna follow it just as an experiment. I guess that would be smart.
Let's just make an experiment for the next 2 years. Let's follow a new god.
Yeah, whatever Neil has written down there. So okay, figured it out.
For the first paper, I feel good, and for this, okay.
It was an overview, yeah.
Okay, 3, 2, 1,
9.
8.5.
Okay.
We can go 9.
Thanks all for listening. It's been a Thinkin Bros. Go to thinkinbros.com for more information, or contact us at thinkinbros@gmail.com. I have been Chris for now. It's, as of right now, January 2024. And that is
Alex.
Right. And then we'll see you next week.
Bye.